Good morning. How is everybody this morning?
Good morning.
And there's Julia. Good morning. How are you? Nice to
Wonderful.
see you. It's actually quite chilly this morning here in Oklahoma. I have a Julia, I don't know how you do it. You're like Miss Sleeveless.
I'm in my house.
So am I, but I got all the windows open and it's chilly. All right, so we are not going to waste any time this morning because we have we're probably going to go over our hour this morning. So don't forget, if we do go over and you're unable to continue watching with us this morning live, don't forget that it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, you already know that. And if you're watching on Facebook, please know that we also have a Rumble channel as well. And we're really easy to find on both Rumble and YouTube. All you need to do is type in the search bar, Reclaim Oklahoma Parent Empowerment, and our channel comes right up. So if we go long and you can't stay, please make sure to find the whole rest of the podcast there. So good morning, and Julie and I are excited this morning. We have a blogger with us this morning. If you've not read the visit blog, V1SUT Vantage, you really need to find that. They're on Substack. She's on Substack. She's done a great series on, she did a great series on Joy Hoffmeister initially, and it was phenomenal. Julie and I were blown away. We were like, how does this person know all these things? Yeah. So she did a great job with that. And she was contacted because of her work that she had done early on in that early Substack. She was contacted by some people in Bartlesville who have had this situation going on with public drag queen performances, and they've been a little frustrated by that, and they contacted our blogger, whom we're going to refer to as Mary today. And we're going to have Mary explain why she does not have her photo on with us this morning. So she was contacted by some citizens in Bartlesville about this. And then, as she has done, she's really an amazing researcher and did some great research on what's going on in Bartlesville, how this came to pass. And we wanted to have her on this morning to talk to you about what she's discovered, because this isn't okay. And what's going on is being done a lot in the dark, and everybody needs to know what's going on because your government starts under your feet in your own town. So I'm going to welcome Mary this morning, our V1SUT Vantage blogger. How are you this morning, Mary?
I am excellent. Thank you, Jenni and Julia. It's a privilege to be on. We connected during the time when a lot of dark money was flowing through Oklahoma. And the Rope team was doing a really good job at exposing that and letting people know who's really running our state. So we have a lot of commonalities there in the rope team and picking apart legislation, proposed legislation, and letting parents know what's really happening. So I so appreciate your efforts on behalf of parents. And this is a story that parents are our heroes in this story, and they're fighting hard. So it's the perfect platform to come on and talk about what's happening in Bartlesville.
Good.
So I'm just going to jump in. This is not drive-by journalism. And as a journalist by trade and education, this blog came about because I think a lot of what's happening from the local level up that none of us are quite too pleased about in our country and our communities has to do with drive-by journalism. And what I mean by that is this one-way highway where the main media, whether it be your local newspaper, your local news stations, when something happens, they jump in, they write 5 short paragraphs that a lot of times aren't even accurate, and they're regurgitated, and they never come back and tell you what else has happened. And it's left a lot of communities just hanging in the wind without help. So I want to talk about the story in Bartlesville, and Jenni did a great lead in. It's a story about community standards. It is about a drag queen performance, more than one, that happened at a pride event, but it's about community standards and these just minimum limits of public behavior that we all agree to that allow us to live peacefully and coexist. It really is sort of the bedrock of great diversity in a community that's peaceful and safe. It's also about private lives and public lives. So typically the citizens, the vast majority of Bartlesville and lots of places like them, Everytown USA, have their private and intimate lives that are very private. And things like adult sexuality don't make it into the public square, the very physical public square. So this is new behavior. And it's really being reframed in a way that isn't really what it's all about. So we have to stop and think really rationally about it. But it's also about the protection of innocence of children and how that affects healthy child development. That's a community standard that was unquestioned just a very few years ago. We all agreed that the innocence of children needs to be protected. And we're seeing suddenly that community standard is just being pulled out from under communities. So these folks are fighting for, I hear a lot from them about the future of where their children are growing up and where their grandchildren are growing up. So let me tell you a little bit about Bartlesville. Now, do you have slides or do I, Jenni?
You should have them.
Okay. So, and excuse a little translational jumble of the slides, but you can see what's going on here. This was the very first article, the title at the top, that I did about Bartlesville. As Jenni said, citizens reached out and said, we have no one to tell the truth. Our local paper was bought out long ago. It's run out of DC. No one will really tell what we're battling about here. So Bartlesville, if some of the listeners don't really understand, it's a community up in Northeast Oklahoma, 30-some thousand people, just a really neat place to live. It's not the smallest town in Oklahoma. It's not a city, but it's not a suburb. It's kind of a standalone. A lot of things that are happening here really are representative of what's happening all over the country and all over the state. So a group called Oklahomans for Equality, or OKEQ, came to town over the last several years. It's actually a chapter of a Tulsa group, a very well-funded, very leftist, very political Tulsa group. So they opened a chapter in Bartlesville, and things have really changed since then. In September, they had their Pride event in literally the town square. Bartlesville has the center of town, which is Unity Square. There's a very famous Frank Lloyd Wright building. It's the only building, sort of commercial building he ever did. Their community centers there, and they have a huge outdoor area for events. So they had their Pride event there, and there were some perverse drag performances. And there's much evidence in video that that's what was happening. And of course, the citizens of this town sort of said, whoa, we don't do that here. Those are not our community standards. They petitioned their city council. Thousands signed a petition, and they did it in a very, very reasonable way that was very equally applied. They said, what we want to ban from just our public spaces is any adult-oriented entertainment. So that was really a reasonable request that seemed like this would be one story. Of course, the city council is going to agree that, and we'd move on. But that's not really what happened.
So let me ask you a quick question just to
Sure.
highlight that. So the people in Bartlesville who were upset by this didn't go and say, didn't pitch a big fit and specifically call out drag queens or anything. They just said no adult entertainment.
Exactly. They said no, and the quote in the petition was adult-oriented entertainment. And that did not mean there couldn't be 21 and over private establishments that still do these things. It meant in our public tax-funded venues, we're not going to do any adult-oriented entertainment. So to say that's equally applied, if the Exotic Dancers Association came forward and said, we want to have our convention and do performances and scantily clad things, that would not be allowed. If the Swingers Association came forward, that would not be allowed. It's not about sexual orientation. It's about community standards.
But let me ask you this, though, too. And Katie, this is what we've found. Everybody, who knows this knows that we started on the dirty book issue. I mean, over a decade ago. And there's still not, it's gotten worse. It's not gotten better. And a lot of the argument that they've had with us, whether it be legislators, whether it be anybody, what is a community standard anymore? Do we know what a community standard is? When you say adult entertainment, do we even know what adult entertainment is? Because if I think you would agree that, certainly if you go back to the 50s and we fast forward to here, what was considered adult entertainment in the 50s? Holy cow. What compared to what you consider adult entertainment today? So don't you think that maybe that's kind of a big problem too, is just the erosion of what you consider adult entertainment anymore and what community standards actually are?
Exactly. That is the battle that this community is in. You couldn't have said it better. For generations, forever in this town, there's been nothing like this. Nobody stepped over this line. So we do see a degradation of those standards in the general culture. And this is a Northeast Oklahoma town that has more churches than it does 7-Elevens. The standards have always been pretty well agreed upon here. So language is very important. You're correct. And this entire conversation, this slide right here, will highlight that the LGBT community, and particularly Oklahomans for Equality, would like to make this about civil rights for people of alternate sexualities. And it is not about that, but they constantly shift the focus away from the behavior and they put it on a victimization, if that makes sense. So a young woman that fronts Bartlesville, OKEQ Bartlesville, this chapter, got up in front of the city council as this petition signed by thousands of people from Bartlesville. The vast, vast majority are against this kind of behavior in public. And she said, of course, we don't want adult entertainment in public spaces. She aligned publicly with the community standard. And she said, plainly stated, there's no nudity, there was no obscenity, no sexually suggestive performances. If you look at that picture on the left, that's a response from Facebook when someone posted a clip of one of those performances with a man. There were children immediately in front of him, grabbing his genitalia with nothing but hose over them. Okay. Facebook said, your post didn't follow our community standards on nudity and sexual activity. So there's no doubt that we're not acknowledging, activists here are not acknowledging what actually happened. And then the last part of her comments were reminding city leaders that legal action would be taken if they could not hold their pride events as they say. And she says abiding by community standards But she's already lied in the statement before that they did abide by community standards. And we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Well, let me back up there too and just say, so this is a threat.
Yes.
I mean, they're immediately taking a threat, and I alluded to the reason why we don't have your face on our broadcast this morning, and I think it's important to kind of let the audience know why that is.
Well, telling the truth is not entirely popular these days, and I don't want to sort of point it at independent journalists, but I can tell you, I talked to one of the decision makers here who is doing an elected representative who's doing a very good job of trying to represent the people who sent him to that local office. He's had his home and his car vandalized, been threatened. There's a lot of pushback on this that is dysregulated and very emotional.
So there's a criminal element involved. And a lot of the degradation, I was just going to say, comes through our TVs. I mean, there are things on TV during the day anymore. And if they don't have, even on shows that are family friendly, they'll put a stupid ad that is disgusting.
Yes, there definitely is. And you all make a great point about, what is the community standard? Where is the line? And every community really needs to be thinking about this. This is not just Bartlesville. We have sort of sleptwalked into this, and we'll get into a little about how we know that's so. So I just want to take a minute and say, as they're shifting this conversation, saying you're stepping on our rights as these activities are going on, just always take the behavior out of the context. So take this out of a pride event. I'm just going to go back and look at this particular picture of this man and what he was doing in front of children. Let's just say we're at another public space. We're at a bus stop of elementary school students, and a grown man comes up and dressed like this, lifts his clothing and grabs his private parts in front of those children. That is the behavior in a different context. Is that behavior now dangerous? Does it harm children? Is it criminal? And I think we always need to be changing that context, because somehow when these things move inside what is called a pride event, which is a public event based on adult sexuality in itself, it's getting a pass. And that's a really dangerous new community standard to set. Yeah. So there was a lot in this town of don't believe your eyes. There was video flowing everywhere. There was a street preacher there were several street preachers that I interviewed. They were called, as I was, by citizens to be involved. And that was before this September event in 2022. They protested at the event. It was covered by Tulsa media. There was no violence. There was no craziness from the protesters. They stayed behind lines as police asked them to do. So there was nothing there, but video started to leak out. And one of these street preachers, his name is Richard Penkoski of Warriors for Christ Ministries, put together a compilation video that showed the obscenity happening here and interspersed Oklahomans for Equality, Bartlesville's president, standing in front of the city council saying it didn't happen. So he really outed this nonprofit for being inaccurate in their public statements, and TikTok got a hold of it, and it went viral. At no point did OKQ come out and acknowledge that and said, yes, we said we don't want this in public either. Our pride events are going to be different. They sort of doubled down. So we know they really are in the business of changing community standards.
I find it funny because the left and these groups are the ones that came up with the term gaslighting. And it's so funny because they don't even know what their own term means, because they do the same. Don't look at all of the things that are going on this video here. That's not what it was. It was blah. It's just crazy.
It is crazy. But this town wasn't taking it. This is a very inspiring story. These people showed up en masse at this city council meeting. It was overflowing. And the city council assigned their city attorney to review standing laws at the state level, at the municipal level, and decide if any laws were broken, decide if laws needed to be strengthened. The city council really looked at that point like they were listening to the people. And so as that meeting ended, the fight sort of moved to social media, which is our other town square, not the one where the Pride event takes place, and moved on from there. So the city attorney took over. This is a man, and really, I want to say, the point of telling this story and the people making decisions in this story is not to specifically come after individuals, but it really shows where we've gotten in these local communities, state communities, and our country. And I think it's really important to say, this is what happens when people get into a position of power and they stop representing the people.
Yeah.
City Attorney Jess Kane did a presentation and then a subsequent city council meeting. He spent about an hour going through what the local ordinances were, what state ordinances were, and throughout the entire presentation, myself and the other people listening and people I've interviewed said he clearly showed how laws were broken. They have current ordinances against public obscenity that were broken. And then he concluded by saying, well, no crime happened because no arrests were made.
Oh my gosh.
And he never mentioned the most important law protecting children in our state. And that has to do with DHS and child welfare and the definition of child neglect and abuse, which includes the harm of exposure to adult sexuality. We are all mandated reporters. If we see this, we are committing a crime if we do not report it to the child abuse and neglect hotline. There was just absolutely no mention. So
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? Because that is an excellent point. And you said this earlier, and I want to double down on your comment. We're not contextualizing this, because if those men that were acting that way in that public square in Bartlesville were doing that in front of a child that they had jurisdiction over, DHS had given them jurisdiction over that child, there would have been hell to pay. So we can't, we're going to put that all aside and say, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, this isn't a public space. You know, it's not affecting children the same way as it would if this were a person with jurisdiction over the child. How simply ridiculous is that argument? And why in the world would anybody reasonable even stand for that kind of argument?
And how sick are the people defending this kind of nonsense? It's just...
It is, but I think the labels of hateful, a lot of the pushback against this is hashtag love wins and hate is the real virus.
Yeah.
And I can tell you unequivocally, I have probably had not dozens, but hundreds of contacts with people from Bartlesville commenting on this, providing information, sending emails. Not one has said they hate anyone. Not one has said LGBT people shouldn't live here. Not one has said any group should not use public spaces. They are advocates for innocence. It's that simple, but they're being labeled with, and that label, when you have to live in that town, is difficult.
Again, with the gaslighting.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So at the end of this particular council meeting, the city council seemed to see right through it. It's hard to understand why this particular city attorney is taking the turns that he is, but the council saw through it, and they ordered the city attorney to cease negotiations with Oklahomans for Equality, to try and work this out. And they ordered him to hire outside counsel to draft the requested ordinance that would ban adult-oriented entertainment within the next 120 days. So this really seemed like a victory. They were listening to the vast majority of the town. And then, not April Fools, something really extraordinary happened that shows us that representative government is in trouble at the local level.
Yeah.
They slipped a brand new, disregarded what they had told publicly, the community, that they would be moving ahead on this ordinance, and they slipped a new 1-year agreement into the agenda for an April 3rd council meeting just a few days before the council meeting. And this is exactly what it said. It said that they would discuss and take possible action to ratify an agreement with Oklahomans for Equality related to drag performances. Let me tell you a little bit about that agreement. So it sounds like they're making progress and this is going to be handled. That's not at all what it was. The new agreement allowed Oklahomans for Equality in Bartlesville to hold their drag shows in a public building with children present, and agreed to no content moderation whatsoever, and provided taxpayer-funded security through the Bartlesville Police Department.
Wow.
It was really hard for people to get their head around, but they're awake. This is the difference when a town is sleepwalking and assuming everything is as it always has been, and when they've been awakened. They packed the next city council meeting. It was overflow into second rooms.
Good.
There were 20, maxed out 20 speakers. And if you want to be inspired by what it sounds like to fight back, go to the Bartlesville City Council. Information is on their public site. They have the video, and you can go straight to the citizen speakers. There were young people. There were older people that lived there their whole lives. There were lots of parents. There were pastors. There were even a couple of speakers who were that child who was exposed to adult sexuality, harmed by it, driven into addiction, and said, please don't do this.
So I got to ask though, and Shelley Griffith, who's a friend of mine, actually lives in Bartlesville, and she's made a couple of comments. And thanks so much for that, Shelley. It's great to have somebody who lives there, you know, being able to say something. But between you and Shelley, I'm curious to know why would the city council attempt to do what they did, which was just essentially screw over the population, you know, by adding in what was the impetus for that? Yeah. What was that? What was the motivation?
Well, that's a very big question. And that is why this story is so hard to let go of, because I want the answer to that. The citizens of this town want the answer to that. For sure, it feels like the city attorney is working more for this activist group than he is for the people paying for his services that he's supposed to be serving. It may have something to do with kicking the can down the road and some statewide legislation that is proposed that would handle this. When people have political aspirations, they try really hard to ride that middle line. And yes. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here with a lot of the decision makers. And
but
I think
that's
it's
not
really
even a middle. That's not even a middle line. That is just a train wreck off the rails. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
I agree. There doesn't feel like there's a gray zone here. And what they don't understand is in representative government, sure, someone's going to sue. These people stepped up to the microphone at the beginning of this conversation and said, and I'm paraphrasing, if we don't get our way, we're going to sue. But in a representative government, if the majority of people, vast majority, 19 out of 20 speakers, that's 95%, say this is a hill we're willing to die on. The protection of our children is the most important thing, move forward with the ordinance, then people who are representatives, and those who work for them and answer for them should be respecting that. But as you can see from the slide, the council, in a really astounding move, voted 3-2 to approve the agreement immediately after hearing that. The city attorney stood up after the citizen speakers in objectively, one of the most arrogant bureaucratic speeches that I've ever heard. He degraded the citizens for what they were saying. And it was clear that there was a lot of elitism going on. They know better.
Oh, that happens in school board meetings and everything else these days. They think they're the experts. They think they're the only one whose opinion matters. They couldn't care less about the people that are the parents, for goodness sakes.
Exactly.
Well,
The decent people, they don't care.
yeah, but and we've talked about this before, that's on us, because how many people actually go to their city council meetings? How many people actually go to their school board meetings? When these people who are elected actually, go unchecked, don't forget, I've been a mayor. And a mayor on a board of 5 in a small town. And it's very hard to go against the stream, especially when you've got, a room full of people sitting there looking at you. It's very hard to go against what, they want to do. It can be it disconcerting even, so if we as people would attend these meetings regularly, the people that we elect wouldn't get the idea that they're the only ones in the room and can do whatever they want. But we have allowed them to be in that position. So few people ever show up for these meetings that they have literally gotten the idea that they're God. They're the only people in the room and they can do what they want. And that's why we have got to do what these people in Bartlesville have done. And that is stand up and go to these meetings, but not just when there's something going awry. We need to go all the time.
Mm-hmm. You're exactly right. And even if people are unable to, all of the information, live feeds, all of those things are online. You can know what's coming up at the city council meeting. You can know what they talk about.
Exactly.
Although in this case, I'm going to tell you, transparency is a gigantic issue. So think about it. The city attorney was ordered publicly to stop negotiations with this group and to move ahead, get outside counsel, and draft an ordinance. And then he popped up with a new agreement. He answers to the elected representatives of the people. So this is either insubordination or we have a whole bunch of meetings that are in communications that are breaching the Open Meetings Act. And everything is on board. And the fact that the council did not call him out on the spot and say, why do we have a new agreement? We told you not to, shows that there's a lot of things shifting behind the scenes here that the people paying for it don't get to be privy to.
Yeah.
It's concerning.
Exactly.
But the encouraging part at the back of the meeting, straight after the vote, were your favorite people, some parents who immediately started gathering people to inform them that there would be a recall of these 3 council members who voted to allow drag performances in a public building with children and no content moderation. Oh, and by the way, taxpayer, you're picking up the security bill because these people need to be protected, these activists, not the children, the grown-ups. So that's ongoing.
So let's read these names out loud. Has anything happened on this?
Yes, it's in process right now. So they are collecting signatures and they need 20% in each one of these wards. People are extremely interested. I can tell you an encouraging thing is there have been some public businesses involved in this conversation. There was a local restaurant who hosted some drag performances and their business suffered greatly. Boycotts work to enforce community standards. Conversely, there was a business that agreed to be a site where you could come in that ward and sign the petition to recall their councilman. And there were lots of threats. There were lots of, I'm never going to go there again from the activists. Their business is booming. So folks, you are in the majority if you want to protect children. Do not be afraid. So they are supporting businesses that are doing this. I think the one point that I would make is this could be, in my opinion, accomplished pretty quickly through the churches. Bartlesville has a lot of very big, very strong churches. And a few Sundays set up at those churches could send a really good message that we demand representative government. I'm not sure what's happening there.
Well, and I was going to say, I'm wondering again, I'm not a resident of Bartlesville, but we have people on watching the stream right now that are. I'm wondering if anybody wants to comment about that. I mean, are these churches, what's going on with these churches? Why, if you have so many churches in the Bartlesville area, that we don't have churches coming out and, expressly speaking out against this? I know there was one, because I talked to Shelley, and I know that there was one, but the street preacher that came out, my gosh, he was arrested and assaulted and all kinds of stuff, was he not?
Well, we're going to get into that, because there's a lot happening there, that not just Bartlesville, it actually involves our rights to free speech and to freedom of religion for the entire state. There's a case going now that we need to talk about. So let me jump to that. But I do see some really great comments that someone was just mentioning, that the city attorney's been sort of sending his representatives around. He sent his wife to this meeting that you see here, Northeast Oklahoma Grassroots. These are the parents that were fighting back against this, sort of pulling the attention to themselves as a victim. I was told during an interview that by the end of the beating, she had a group of pastors surrounding her at the back of the room, praying for her and her husband, the city attorney. So I'm not sure what's happening there. Also, I was told a very recent GOP meeting that another family member showed up and said, oh, there's a state law coming. The city attorney's doing the right thing. Stop attacking him. I don't think anybody's attacking.
It's already illegal.
Exactly. And I think what people don't understand is this is a local issue. They have to have their ordinances in place. Even if a statewide piece of legislation passes, they're not coming with state police to enforce them. And these groups have shown, these activist groups have shown over and over that they will step over standing law. So local communities need to review their local ordinances about these things and tighten them up. It's not the state will not be a replacement for setting community standards.
Right.
So Shelley just said we currently have a person reaching out to the churches.
That's excellent. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
More power to them. So just sort of moving on in the interest of time,
right.
After this vote, as we talked about, it really begged the question, how did we get here that these leaders think they can really so brazenly ignore the will of the people? And so then the research sort of turned to, throughout this series, the infiltration of different institutions in town that sort of built this confidence to go against the people and to align with this agenda. So it looked at shortly, public festivals. They have the Mozart Festival here. They have the Sun Festival. Any festivals that they've had or big public events, they've always been truly family friendly and never centered around any adult sexuality. So that's something really different, is sort of the entertainment institution in the town. But then we looked at local institutions. Who determines these community standards? And inevitably, churches and schools set the standards. An elected council sort of enshrines them in law. And then police and courts are supposed to enforce them. And then if you have a truthful media, they're going to shine truth on all sides. If someone's stepping over, if politicians are not doing their job, if courts are not doing their job, if police are not doing their job, that's how it's supposed to work. And we just sort of walked through what were the breakdowns in these sort of processes. And we started with the schools, which you all have worked a great deal with that. So way back in 2015, Oklahomans for Equality in Bartlesville sort of supported and partnered and worked to bring a gay straight alliance club, which that's a national institution, to Bartlesville High School. And I don't know if people understand, over 4,000 junior highs and high schools in our country have the GSA within their walls. And it stands for Gay Straight Alliance, but that is not what it is. It's very much the Not Straight Club and teaching the Not Straight Club. So the names really misleading. This sign that you see here is a freshman in 2015, 2016 at Bartlesville High School that never had this, saying, I do team dance and I won state and I'm asexual and genderqueer. This is a child in the GSA club. So take this again. Let's just say, take this out of context, right? And let's just look at the behavior of the adults here. What if a high school teacher who's male, right, comes to the school and says, I'm going to do an after school club where I get with a bunch of freshman girls and we're going to explore their sexual preferences. I mean, what would someone have said? It would have never been allowed. But somehow
it's flipped.
LGBT club comes to town in the form of OKEQ, and this is what's happening with kids after school. So that was super, super concerning. And we just moved through, I won't spend a ton of time on it. We moved through the different institutions, and probably the most shocking was in research running into how a board member from OKEQ, a young woman, was involved with both DHS and then the Bartlesville Police Department. And through policies of appeasement, this is really about identity politics. And when we don't hold people accountable for performance, for qualifications, and we look more at identity politics in our policies, really bad things can happen. So this young woman, and again, my point is not to focus on this one person, but this story needs to be told. I encourage people to go and read this story on the Substack page. This young woman was first involved with DHS back in 2017. And there's a big push in Bartlesville through the DHS and connections with a nonprofit called Village Fosters to place state custody children in LGBT homes. It is really publicized, and it was happening, and it was being promoted, and it was in conjunction with a pretty high level person at DHS who was involved with both DHS and founding Village Fosters. So there was a lesbian couple who had children in their home, and a child's arm was broken by what we know now as abuse. And that abuse was marked by DHS as unsubstantiated. The home remained open, and a newborn infant named Xander Cage Bruntmeyer was placed in the home. He died at the hands of one of these women who was known for dysregulation and previous child abuse. And it wasn't until after his very tragic death that they went back and prosecuted and really truly investigated the broken arm. She pled guilty on a plea deal with the broken arm. And that was under a judge that we'll talk more about. So he was very well aware of this woman, DHS worker, Ms. Pitt's involvement in that case, in that investigation. The woman who perpetrated the abuse, her name is Tracy Dawn Nelson, is serving a life sentence with parole for the murder of Xander Bruntmeyer. And then immediately after Ms. Pitts left DHS, we do not know, we're not privy to the information about how that departure took place, but she was immediately hired by the Bartlesville Police Department and given a gun. So,
oh my gosh.
Yes, this story needs to be told. So in 2019, the family of Thomas Gay lost him in a police-involved shooting involving Miss Pitts.
Oh no.
So Miss Pitts is the one on the right there with the other police officer. Is that who this person is?
No, that's Officer
okay.
Graham of the Bartlesville Police Department and his wife.
Okay.
The young man on the left is Thomas Gay, and the infant, of course, is Xander Bruntmeyer. And the gentleman on the right is Officer Graham, formerly of the Bartlesville Police Department. When Miss Pitts was an officer, she and another female officer accused Officer Graham of inappropriate behavior. During the trial in which Officer Graham was fully acquitted, it was found that Officer Pitts gave false testimony. There was video evidence from body cam that said that was just not so. She was suspended for that during an investigation, and she has since been reinstated to the Bartlesville Police Department.
Oh my goodness. She's on the police department now?
Yes, that is my understanding.
So let's recap. So a gay woman who is responsible for 2 deaths in the Bartlesville community is a police officer in Bartlesville.
She is, and I don't know if she is
What?
now a board member of OKEQ Bartlesville, but she self-described and others described. There's evidence that she either was or is a OKEQ Bartlesville board member.
Wow.
Yes, and unfortunately, there may be some justice for Officer Graham. I'm not sure what's going on with that litigation. I have interviewed his attorney in the past since he was acquitted of any inappropriate conduct, but there is no justice for Thomas Gay or baby Xander Bruntmeyer because wrongful death suits were brought and both were unsuccessful. It is very hard to sue the government.
So I want to point out something just really fast, and y'all correct me if you feel like I'm, on the wrong track here, but I have a lot of friends and even family who say, I'm not going to get involved in this LGBTQ, I'm not going to get involved in that because I just don't see that it's not going to do anything. Live and let live. I'm just, I'm out on this. Okay. So I understand that perspective. A lot of us, particularly, Christians don't like, standing up and standing up for themselves because somehow we make it feels like we're being mean or, not spreading Jesus's love or, something like that. And so, I can understand how people can feel that way, but I want to point out that, perhaps Officer Graham, felt the same way. Perhaps this young man's family felt the same way who was killed. And yet what's happened is our society, if any of this had been a white male, and I'm going to even up that ante, a white straight male had broken a child's arm, had killed a person in the community, that had accused somebody of doing something wrong, particularly a woman, that straight white man would have been dealt with immediately. And it would have been, just, we've seen it happen across the United States, how straight white men have been treated in reaction to any altercation with a protected class of people like LGBTQ and trans people have been. So you can say, I'm not going to get involved with that. And I'm just not, there's nothing I can do about it. But I see these people in Bartlesville, Shelley Griffith and her other friends standing up against this as being absolute champions of equity, equality. And I mean equity. You use that word. It means nothing. Equality, because all we really want is for people to be treated similarly and have justice under the law like we're supposed to have, blind justice. None of this is blind justice. This is justice dependent upon what class of people you happen to be in. And those of you people who think this is never going to touch you and you'll leave well enough alone, wait until it lands at your doorstep. Wait.
And it will. And it will.
And then at that point, I don't want to hear any complaining about, oh, well, blah, 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 poor me. You had the opportunity to stand up against this protected class nonsense and nip it in the bud and stand for equality, where all people, regardless of whatever sexuality you are, whatever color you are, we're all treated the same under the law. This is simply nonsense. And again, Mary, I so appreciate you bringing all of this to light. And I so appreciate the people of Bartlesville who are standing against this. And I'm sorry that I had to start preaching there, but let me stop so you can continue.
No, I appreciate that you're saying that, because that's why I said the story is important. Take the time to read it, because consequence is no longer tied to conduct. Consequence is tied to intersectionality. And that's a very, very dangerous thing.
Which is intersectionality is equity.
It is,
which is not equality.
No.
Equity is being treated the way you're being treated specially because you're part of a protected class. That's equity. That's not equality. Equality is when everybody is treated the same under the law. So don't get these terms confused. It's a Marxist ruse, because that's what Marxists do, is change the language so that they can substitute one word, and then you think it means the same thing as the word that it had been in the language previously. And that's how they win. Is by fooling people who won't do the research for themselves. So equity is nonsense. Equality is everything.
Exactly.
So I'm sorry, please.
No, you're okay. You've really got me thinking, which that's what I appreciate about this. It really is about envisioning in your town the consequences that are happening behind the scene with these policies of appeasement. They're appeasing an activist ideology. They're not worried about applying the law, as you said, equally among all citizens. And conduct. This is a story about, what do you have to do now in this ideological environment to be fired from a very important public service position where lives are at stake?
And what do the other police officers think about all this? Do they know? Are they aware of who she is and that she's killed people?
Well, Julia, you just put another interview on my list. That's a really good point. There's some people that I probably need to talk to there.
Yeah, and I wonder if I would imagine the police, the cops, are kind of like teachers are, because how many, Julia, times in a week do we hear teachers say, "Well, I can't say anything about this because if I say something about this, I'm going to be fired." So
so what? If
exactly
20 of them come forward, they won't be fired.
Exactly, and again. Sometimes there's a hill worth dying on. And personal sacrifice is going to be part of this fight.
Well, and you would
assume all the hills.
But you would certainly assume, though, that a hill to die on would be the protection of children.
Yes, especially as a police officer.
Exactly.
Good night.
So in the interest of time, that was
sorry.
2 examples of infiltration of institutions and how it builds up, and then how policymaking decisions are changed. And another really important one has to do with the courts. So I can tell you, initially, in looking into the District Court of Washington County, I was actually researching who are these OKEQ Bartlesville board members, what's going on here. And I found in the system a personal protective order. And it was against the street preacher who was most boldly invited by the citizens to town, protested peacefully. It was against him, and it was brought by petitioners who are both the president and vice president of OKEQ Bartlesville, a married lesbian couple. One is the woman who talked and assured us there was no nudity or obscenity in the performances, and the other is her spouse. And it was granted by Associate District Judge Russell Vaclaw. And the thing that was so alarming about this PPO, I immediately tracked down the defendant, the street preacher, and interviewed him. The thing that was amazing about this is that there was no relationship between the petitioners and the defendant. So the laws about...
Hold on one quick second.
Sure.
If you can't see a comment, here's a comment from Shelley. The lesbian police officer was on duty at the drag show.
Yes, she was. And she actually provided the police report for these two other, remember, the police officer was an OKQ Bartlesville board member. She provided the police report to these other two married board members so that they could file for a protective order and silence the street preacher with the greatest social media following. The police report that was presented to the court is riddled with inaccuracies. But
good night.
In an emergency ex parte order, personal protective orders are really a tool to protect people who are suffering from domestic violence.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yes. So the law says you have to have a relationship to be considered for these. So you have to have either a romantic relationship, a familial relationship, and now due to a change in the law, you could have a residential relationship. There was a case of a roommate who suffered by not being able to get a personal protective order. But this is about personal relationships and personal contact between the petitioner and the defendant. There was no relationship between the street preacher. He'd never spoken to either of these women. He'd never been in the same room with them, except at a city council meeting where each of them spoke separately. Morgan Lawrence and Richard Penskowski, the preacher, spoke separately. He did not know where they live. He had never threatened them in any way. Yet this judge went ahead and granted the order. And the way these things work, this is an emergency order, and the defendant doesn't even know there's an order against them yet. They're not there in court when this thing is signed off on. So looking a little bit into Judge Backlaw, he had a pretty significant conflict of interest in this, just like the officer who wrote the police report had a conflict of interest. He had been doing workshops related to anti-bullying with OKQ Bartlesville and had a pretty regular relationship with them. That's him in the picture there. So really, he should have been recused from this case in the first place.
Absolutely.
They don't follow their own laws, though. They make laws in order to stop people like the street preacher.
Exactly. That's what made this appear to be more about censorship than it was anyone's protection. So let me tell you where everyone needs to pay attention here. This was the basis. There has to be a threat of harm for a protective order, right? Without those relationships, you have to have a strong harassment stalking case to be able to get a judge to sign off. And we see journalists see them all the time, come to the court and the court say, no, I'm sorry. That doesn't meet the threshold for stalking. Or no, I'm sorry. You don't have that relationship with this person. That's not what this tool is about. So the street preacher used two different scriptures, and you can read them here, that the court would go on to deem as a threat of harm against these women. Wow. So this is for whatever your beliefs are, whether you're a Bible-believing Christian or you're an atheist, that's really not the point. These are the street preacher's deeply held religious beliefs, and nowhere when you put them in context do they say that he is going to do something violent to these women. They say that God is the one who will take judgment on behaviors against his dictates. So they didn't file a protective order against God. They filed it against Richard Penskowski, who has a very large social media following, and the order included a full social media gag. So this effectively took him out of the fight against obscenity in public spaces in Bartlesville.
Yeah.
But the reason that everyone needs to be heads up about this is a direct threat. Now, again, take this one out of context. What if a member of OKQ Bartlesville board decides to go plop down in a pew in a church and they're talking about Genesis and they're talking about, that pastor is talking about God's plan for men and women? Can they now file something against him What if he uses one of these scriptures? Can they then say that was a threat of harm?
See, that's a good point. And that's a
Ooh,
point that people are making, but nobody is listening to.
Yep.
No, I think they're listening now, because let me tell you this particular story where we start to call this out, and particularly when it gets to the next hearing, I will tell you one point in this case to me that stood out really deeply is that the petitioners so did not know the man they said was threatening him that they could not provide any information to the court about where he lived, where he was from. They could not serve him. So they actually wrote on the bottom of the order, they stalked his social media and gave the courts information about where he would be protesting against an event that OKEQ Tulsa was promoting, and it was a Christmas drag event. That was, if the video is out there, it's one of the most obscene things that's been called family friendly that I've ever seen. So he was outside of that when they came and served him with this piece of paper, the Tulsa police. And then at the extension hearing, the petitioners claimed that they were terrified because he'd spoken their names, or their names had been spoken out loud in a live feed. So the live feed was him being served by police with the protective order that they had sent against him. And they used that in the extension hearing as proof that he was somehow coming after them. You really can't make this up. But this story, because of the implications for everyone on speech and religion, has gone national. A bunch of national sites have picked this up and they're talking about it. So let me tell you a little bit about what happened at the extension hearing.
Wait, can you back up just one quick second?
Yes, I can.
I want everybody to look at the picture on the right as you're looking at the screen. This is a drag performer. This is a child. Notice where the man's hand is.
Yep.
Now, let me ask you this question. If that had been a white heterosexual man in that same pose, tell me what would have happened here. I find that he is literally resting his hand on her breast. An adult man resting his hand on the breast of a child, and nobody's coming apart at the seams over this. What is going on? This is pure demonic. I don't see how you can get away. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to go on a small rant again. I'm sorry. If you have to get off, please come back and find the download.
Please do. I want to hear what you have to say about this.
So Mark 5:9 and Mark 5 tells the story of Jesus confronting a man in a village who was possessed by a demon. Mm-hmm. And Jesus had been called there by the people in the village. And Jesus basically addresses the man. And he says, "Who are you? What do you have to do here?" And the man says, and I'm quoting from Mark 5:9, "I am legion, for we are many." So there are many spirits inhabiting this one man's body. Now, I just want to point out, and if you don't have the same, religion, that's fine with me, but we have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. I am a Christian. This is my belief. If the man said, when confronted by Jesus, "I am legion, we are many," and yet we have people who identify as transgender people who call themselves by the pronouns they and them, and they being many, correct? You don't just say, "Hey, they," when you're talking to some person up the road. You say they when you're talking to many. It is my belief that this is simply demonic. And for those of us who are Christian, and heck, if you're not even Christian, I don't care if you believe in the sanctity of children and the innocence of children, you have to make this stop. You have to stand for the benefit of the innocence of children. Right. This is simply nonsense.
Preying on children is obviously demonic. There's no two ways about it.
How could it not be?
Well, and
Who
what's sort of interesting when you look at this photograph, this is a drag queen that goes by the name of Sky High Kai. He performed at the September Bartlesville Pride event. And one of the things that's difficult is a lot of these drag queens are difficult to tie back to the real person under the makeup. We're allowing these people to put on a costume and be around children in this way. And accountability is tough when you don't know who's under the costume. So I was able to track down some things. And in some of the writing, I go onto the social media page and pull some publicly available things from the person that is Sky High Kai and from behind the scenes at drag shows. It is shocking. And it is what drag really is. Drag is not a family-friendly thing. The culture of drag is from gay bars. He brags and shows and takes pictures of a lot of this. He talks about and shows pictures of the drugs that they do. There is nudity. There is simulation of all kinds of sexual things going on there. So getting back to what is this person doing when they're not reading to these children in the library or school is really very important. We can't separate them.
Okay, so let's make this point then. So Julie and I have actually gone to a town and we went there because the parents were being prevented from being with their children on school grounds. Okay. Yep. As a matter of fact, in Edmond Public Schools, Michael Grande isn't even allowed to go have lunch with his children because he's not allowed to be in there. So now let's make this point and let's bring this point home strongly. My friend Michael is not allowed to go sit with his own son at lunch in Edmond Public Schools. However, they could legitimately have a drag queen come in and read to children when there's only a name, Sky High Kai, and we have no idea who this person actually is, where he comes from, anything else like that, and they won't allow a parent in with a child when there's not been any that parent has never been, and Julia says this all the time. Has that parent been accused of a crime? Has that parent been brought up on charges of a crime? Heck no. And they're not even allowed in the school, but we're going to have drag queens, which we have no idea of their background. All we know is that there's a sexual perversion there, and we're going to allow them access to our children. Are we serious about this, really?
I'm not sure.
Oh my word.
There's actually a pretty famous video of recent that a drag queen is saying, parents, do not expose your kids to drag. Drag shows, as they are highly sexual. Behind the scenes, there is rampant sex, rampant drug use, and says, parents, this is not a child appropriate activity. So the fact that we're trying to water it down and bring it to children is very insincere and very dangerous.
It's sick.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that disguising their identity puts kids, in my opinion, at further risk.
Yeah.
But the country is definitely paying attention. And this particular case is with the Supreme Court now. So at the extension hearing, I just want to make a quick connection. The same judge that here recently gave the emergency order for this PPO was the one who heard the case of the child with the broken arm that went out in a plea deal. He knew that this police officer, he knew who she was from back in the day, yet he used her report. He also was familiar with OKEQ and the board with his anti-bullying work. He knew who wrote this report. He knew of her history. And then when he recused himself from the case after publication, another judge was given the case. Now, she's the highest district court judge in Washington County, and her name is Linda Thomas. And one of the interesting things is this is not a very transparent court. It's really hard to get information for them. They don't make it easy. So I had to interview around some of these things. But someone else that was in the courtroom that served as a witness for the defendant, for the street preacher, gave me a really detailed interview. He kept notes. And he said one of the things that was telling was that Judge Linda Thomas sought to clarify how Sheena Hayes, who was the wife of the president, she's the vice president of Oklahoma Bartlesville, one of the petitioners, identified so that she could properly address her.
Oh, gosh.
She did not do that to anyone else in the courtroom, which shows just how bizarre this is. Just recently, a Georgia judge put a stop to this nonsense, and it kind of went viral. He said, "Stop with the pronouns in my courtroom. This is a blatant attempt to influence the law."
Interesting.
And that the law is blind, and we're here about conduct, not intersectionality. So there's some things happening here in an activist court. Now, Linda Thomas is the judge who presided over the murder case of baby Xander.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
How are these people?
So these people are familiar with what's happening and what has happened, and how a particular actor in this wrote a police report that is the basis for this. So the thing that's really, really concerning is the coach through this interview, the judge coached the petitioners extensively to reach some sort of fix of them feeling unsafe where she could extend this order.
Oh my goodness.
And the attorney sent by OKEQ, he operates a legal services firm and partner with them through there, where he specializes in changing people's names legally, which is illegal in Oklahoma. He's got public comments where he talks about that judges don't have to follow the law. They have broad interpretation, and that they can change somebody's name, even though our legislature has said you cannot. So
judges don't have to follow the law. That's awesome.
It's interesting. And his quote is actually within the publication. So you should reach that. But something else that people need to be aware of, he in the hearing pushed this idea of stochastic terrorism. You will hear it more and more and more. It is the new systemic racism, only applied to people of alternate sexualities. So a personal protective order is about human beings, individuals, and how they interact. It is not about broad ideologies like stochastic terrorism. But it didn't really matter. Linda Thomas extended the PPO for 5 years, which is pretty unheard of. So Richard Penkoski, the street preacher, has to stay away from them. And he also,
oh my goodness,
she strengthened the gag order against him. He cannot mention their names in this fight. So, I mean, clearly.
Is he still off of social media then?
He is not off of social media, but he cannot mention their names. He cannot sort of be in this against what's happening here with OKEQ and the Bartlesville citizens. But the good news here is the Rutherford Institute immediately stepped in. This is a threat to both speech and freedom of religion, and this is what they do. They are a foundation that protects First Amendment freedoms. There was an appeal that was filed to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And here in Oklahoma, when a decision is appealed, there's a couple of things that the court can do. They can send it all the way back down and say, can reconsider. They can send it to sort of a middle court, which would have sent it to Tulsa. But they didn't. They accepted it, and they accepted it pretty quickly. So there is some optimism that they also see the violation of First Amendment freedoms here. But really, I want to get your input about this and think about what this is. This is handing activists a weapon through the court by which to silence opponents who want to protect children.
Clearly.
Yep.
So we're sort of moving here into our last piece of this. I know it's been kind of long, but just we've continued to report about OKEQ in Tulsa. This is Tulsa, very big money reaching into your rural communities. They've been tied to this is an example of drive-by media. the media jumped on a so-called firebombing by an assailant in a MAGA hat, and OKEQ and the owners of the donut shop were sort of co-beneficiaries of a GoFundMe. So you might want to go read that story. That's on the blog. And then City News Tulsa has built on that and has just uncovered a pretty large embezzlement out of Tulsa. And also talking about the fact that OKEQ Bartlesville says it has a board. It is not a registered nonprofit. It is just sort of riding off of these coattails of OKEQ Tulsa. And who is it that the city attorney is even negotiating with? He's negotiating with somebody in Tulsa to set community standards for Bartlesville.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So this really is, be aware, this is a big money group. They have a lot of foundation money, and they have chapters in Bartlesville, McAllister, Tahlequah, and Muskogee. The other group to be aware of, City News Tulsa also just put out an article about some pretty smutty books in the that parents are having a very hard time handling, and displays and those kind of things. So the Enid LGBTQ plus coalition is a group there that where there's a group, kids are not necessarily safe from this. So these are some common misconceptions just in reporting and researching that I'm watching these activists use that parents need to be aware of.
Wait, did you see what Shelley just said?
Yes, I did. And that's been an interesting conversation. There is proof, documented proof, that OKEQ Bartlesville was using the library as their address. There have been a lot of denials about that. And I've done some interviews around that and getting conflicting information. But the evidence itself is there. This was happening. So you see the tie between the library and the advocates for sexual alternatives. So things that they'll say and leverage that just simply aren't so. They will say that banning adult sexuality is a civil rights issue in public with LGBT people. It is not. Communities have the right. I interviewed someone from the Rutherford Institute, and they said they have the right to set their community standards. They have to be equally applied. That is really the litmus test. And the petition by Bartlesville was equally applied. They also say it's legal for parents. This is something the city attorney said. We can't stop parents from bringing kids to sexually explicit performances. Again, state law says that's harmful to children. It should be reported.
Right.
We talked about that this is all about hate of LGBT citizens. I do not hear that from Bartlesville, not a whisper of it. And that drag has always been family friendly. It involves talent and art. The picture itself. So this is OKEQ Tahlequah. What you see when you strip out the most overt of the sexuality that happens where drag normally is performed in 21 plus establishments is men walking around awkwardly in high heels and doing really bad lip syncs to child-friendly music. So it really, I don't know where the art is, and certainly not the family-friendly. And then there's an argument that we shouldn't be concerned about children in the presence of adults of alternate sexuality. So here's one where you're going to get some pushback when I say this, but I say we have to stay with firsthand information. We have to say what really is. We have to stay steeped in reality when we're reporting on these things. So in 2002, before the world went crazy, there was a really popular study, really well done by PhD Timothy Daley. And it estimated at the time that the homosexual population in the United States was between 1% and 3%.
Yeah.
It's now anywhere, if you look at, there's nothing you can trust, but somewhere between 7 and 13% is what you'll get. So there's been an increase. But at the time, that 1% to 3% was found in this extensive study to be responsible for about a third of sex crimes against children. Nowhere am I saying that people who are non-heterosexual are automatically pedophiles. That is not what the data says. But the data shows a strong correlation to the risk increasing when someone moves outside of natural sexual use. And I think we have to remain aware of that.
Yeah.
There's been a little bit of a flip in the narrative now. So because
A little.
So what they do in the narrative now is, say you're attacking LGBT people if you bring up any of these things or attempt to study them. And they flip to putting the label now on the child. So we hear a lot of advocating for LGBT youth.
Yeah.
And that's something that people should really be aware of.
Well, and Planned Parenthood has been, getting things into schools through the sex ed. I think right now, the climate that we're in right now, people need to push for absolutely zero sex ed taught in schools, because
Correct.
they can't handle it. Clearly, it is not helping.
Well, but not only that, it's not a school's job anyway.
It's not.
And
It never
Julie,
was.
you and I have talked about this since we began this organization 12, 15 years ago. Parents are the ones in charge of bringing up their children, period. The more schools get involved, the less parents do, and the more schools feel like they have a right to take and usurp those jobs from parents. So stop it and knock it off. Your job is to do reading, writing, and arithmetic and science, and that's it. Leave everything else to the parent. Be gone.
Agreed. It's interesting because I ran into a book from a teaching class that was published somewhere in the late 1950s for teachers in college. And it had an entire section on boundaries in the family.
Oh, interesting.
What is your job and what isn't your job, what you are to stay out of. So maybe if they could bring back that class.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Might be something interesting. Okay. So these are takeaways for parents and citizens, just things within this research. The redefining of community standards is a local issue. Do not wait for state legislation. The state legislators are looking to the locals to see what they're doing, and they're going to gauge their next action and their votes based on that. Also, local leaders too often run unopposed in local elections, particularly the lawyers, the judges, and the DAs. Yep. The DA has been silent in Bartlesville. He ran unopposed. Both judges that we talked about ran unopposed. And I'm sure you ladies at Rope, who are much more familiar with elections, see that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Know your local laws about obscenity. Call out conflicts of interest between your local leaders and these activists. If the local media won't be truthful, call in some outside perspective. There's a network forming of independent journalists and online publications that will help you.
Well, and I'm going to mention that right here. As a matter of fact, the Patriot Sentinel, I'm going to type it in the comments. Look up the Patriot Sentinel, because that is the kind of the new media.
That's a great point. So the Patriot Sentinel is new, but it is a national umbrella that is really coming out of Oklahoma, and it encompasses the City News Tulsa site, and it also, the Oklahoma City has the City Sentinel that they now own, and the Patriot Sentinel is over them, and they're giving a national voice to things that are happening in Oklahoma.
I put the link to that just so that you guys know. I put the link in the comments.
Okay. The owner said that they're growing 100% every month in their readership. So that's a place to go to connect. Let me see here. The pressure, Bartlesville learned, the pressure to uphold community standards must be constant. They turned their back on their city council for 5 minutes and things went awry. Another thing is city council proclamations. Go and look in your town. For years, the city council in Bartlesville was making pride proclamations, declaring months, pride months, doing these things that citizens never got to weigh in on. No one else has ever asked for proclamations based on their adult sexual preferences. So that really set a standard. You can't stand there and give a proclamation and take pictures and then vote against these people. When laws are broken,
that's a good point.
report the laws to police, DA, sheriffs, and follow up. And boycotts work. The businesses that have been supporting this are suffering in Bartlesville, and those that are supporting the recall are seeing a boom. So vote with your money, and then force transparency. This town has not been transparent. Open records requests have not been complete. And we know that because some city council members have been very forthcoming about all of their communications in this matter. That would be the two that voted against this latest agreement. And we know the others were copied on it, but did not include it in some open records requests. They did not include all of the video that we know exists and has already been out in the media. So you have to force transparency from your local government.
And we need churches to help with that. Pastors need to preach and get their congregations working.
Yes, they do. And that's sort of what's coming next from the publication. One of the things is to talk about the systematic deconstruction of the local church. I call it Anything Goes Jesus. And that's really coming up. There's a lot of misinformation about this new one-year agreement and a lack of transparency, a lot of elitism, and very little efforts to protect children. So we will follow this Bartlesville story to the bitter end.
Well, and I mean, I'm glad that you have, because there was, I was talking to Shelley, as a matter of fact, when we were at the GOP convention a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this very issue. And I was even talking to some other of my friends from Bartlesville that I saw there. And I had two people that I talked to. One said, oh no, everything's fine now. All they can only do it at a club where it's above 18. And then, so nobody under 18 can actually see that. And then another person said, oh my gosh, there's no way they snuck this thing in. And it's so there literally were, in my experience, when I interviewed two people on that, two completely conflicting ideas of what was actually going on. And I think it's because, as Shelley said, that they've got apologists coming to even GOP meetings and trying to talk to people and telling them, different things that's going on. And we had a discussion earlier, and there's even a county commissioner in that area that, instead of going Everett Piper, instead of going to, the actual correct looking up what was actually going on, just went to one of the city council members and got his spiel on it. And then, just went out and said whatever that city council person said. So you've got people that people look up to who aren't even doing their due diligence in this particular situation and telling people what's actually going on. So people have got to have their eyes wide open.
Yeah.
And this is moving forward on anything. And we've seen that, for decades, but it's becoming, it's changing so rapidly. People have to have their eyes completely wide open. You have to completely throw away all your ideas of, this is a great person. This is a great person. I hold this person up as a bastion of, whatever, Christian principles or what. You have to stop that. I mean, people are fallen. That's why we needed Jesus in the first place. Humanity is miserable.
Yeah.
And if you are going to just take people at their word, even people that you've convinced or other people have convinced you are, good people, you got to knock it off. You've got to actually research this stuff yourself. And as Mary says, don't pay attention to the media. Anybody in the media, the actual corporate media, isn't going to tell you what you need to know. They're going to tell you what you want to hear. That's all it is. So, and it looks like somebody else's, Dr. Piper spoke to City Attorney Kane. So again, you are your own advocate. You have to be your own advocate. Julia and I have told everybody that's paid any attention to us over the years, do not pay attention to what we say. If you go research what we say, we've always put our research out there, but you go check our research. Don't ever just go, oh, well, Jenni and Julia said blah. You better do your research, but we become so lazy. We don't want to do anything like that anymore. We don't want to take the time. We just want to go, oh, well, this feels good if I listen to so-and-so, or I believe so-and-so. Knock it off. That's not where we live anymore. This world isn't like that anymore. And, Mary, honestly, if you hadn't been doing this research, thank God for you people in Bartlesville who called her in on this and got her to do this. So thank you, citizenry, for standing up. And corporate media and conservative media are two different things. That's exactly correct. So
I certainly agree with that.
Yeah. So thank you again. I mean, we just can't tell you thank you enough. Do you have anything? I mean, please pay attention to what her slide was. I'm just going to go back to it really. The takeaway for parents and citizens. Please stop your stream and look at those and make sure that you understand. And that's not just for Bartlesville. I mean, that's for any place, anything. And your town for sure. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me and for the work ROPE continues to do. The heroes in Bartlesville really are these parents and grandparents, and you're a huge support to that. And for folks listening, those uncontested races, when they come up, the ROPE organization is really helpful with that. So, and it's about planning ahead. This is how we look long-term in solving these problems.
It absolutely is. And I can't tell you, I mean, we just had that same in our little town. Nobody filed for one of the seats again. So you've got to stop this. I mean, and even if you do it like this, let's say that 50 of you don't need to go to every city council meeting. Dana Mooney just says, thanks for all you do, V1SUT. But here's the thing. And Dana has said this numerous times, and in her organization, she's the chair of the Moms for Liberty group in Canadian County. And Dana does a really great job where what they do is they divide in their group, they divide it up, how they work it. And so one person or a couple of people will go to their school board meeting, and one person will go to their city council meeting, and one person will go to this. So there's always somebody kind of following what's going on and then reporting back to the group. If you want to do it like that, when you guys can take turns. So, because I get it when, people say, I don't have the time to do that. I mean, that's the other thing that we're just being assaulted all the time. And our attention is divided because we have so many things to do, and it's very hard to focus. And that's what the Marxists want. I mean, that's how they win. So if you want to do that, start yourself a group in your own school district or in your own town or whatever, and make sure that you're doing what the Moms for Liberty Canadian County does, and divide those jobs out. So somebody's going somewhere and then reporting back to the group, hey, this is going on. And then that way, when something does go on that you need to do, you can get everybody from the group to go to a meeting then because of that. So,
Christians need to be fearless. It says in the Bible, all over the place, time after time after time after time, do not fear. So stop being afraid to speak out. Yes, you're going to get there. People will give you a dirty look or whatever, but be fearless. And you cannot stay silent in the face of all of this stuff going on. You cannot.
In the face of evil. Let's call it what it is.
And our
in the
job
face of evil, you cannot be silent.
Hold back darkness.
Our children are too important. And on that note, I would say Northeast Oklahoma Grassroots.org. They are running the recall, and they have been fearless.
Say that one more time so I can put it in the comments.
As in Northeast Oklahoma Grassroots.org. And they're standing up for the whole community. So reach out. Reach out if you're concerned about this issue and you're a Bartlesville citizen, and support them.
Excellent. Well, I know that we're over a few minutes, but again, thank you so much.
We're over overtime at this point.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much, ladies.
Yeah, and please make sure you check out Mary's blog. Do me a really quick thing though, and to explain what V1SUT Vantage means. Can you do that?
Yes, I can actually. So the V1SUT Vantage, it's kind of my guilty pleasure. I write for other people, but visit, when in the Bible, Jesus, his words are sometimes in red in the Bible as opposed to all the rest of it. When he really wants to get down to the nitty gritty and get our attention about the few things we absolutely need to know, he prefaces it with, "Verily I say unto thee." So it's an acronym for getting down to what's the most important and truth.
Exactly. Thank you again, Mary. Julia, always great to be with you. And thank you so much for you guys taking your time. And thank you to everybody who's watching this morning.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And for all of you who have watched, please make sure that once this video is stopped, there will be a permanent link that's formed after a few minutes. Please take that link and share it with other people, email it, do whatever you need to do, but let's make sure that we're calling attention to what's going on in Bartlesville so that everybody can learn from that. And we're not going to have this continue on in our town. So
if you want to be on our newsletter list, email me, and at that email address right there on my picture, and we will get you on our newsletter.
Awesome. So thanks again, everybody. And we will see you again on Friday morning at 9 a.m. And not sure why I'm blanking on who we have on Friday at 9 a.m. But it's going to be Alina Ashley, who is a Tulsa Public School board member. And she's going to be with us on Friday to talk about TPS and her particular experiences that she's had on that board. So please make sure that you join us then, and we will see you again. Thank you so much.